Martin was a professional photographer whose life took a dark turn when he discovered spectral figures in his photographs. These figures weren't mere optical illusions, but a ghostly entity from the town's past, revealing a horrifying secret to Martin. This revelation sent him spiraling into despair, leading to a horrible end. Martin's fascination with photography began when he was a young boy. He was captivated by the idea that one could capture a moment in time frozen forever. In 1997, Martin was assigned a new project, one that seemed like any other. He was to photograph the historic town of Malmesbury, located in England. However, this seemingly ordinary assignment was the beginning of an uncanny experience that would transform Martin's life in a way he could never anticipate. Malmesbury was a quaint and peaceful town, known for its rich history and picturesque architecture. Its cobblestone streets, old English buildings, and a majestic abbey dating back to the 12th century provided ample subjects for Martin's lens. Upon arrival, Martin found himself lost in the town's serenity. With his trusty camera in hand, he set out to explore, eager to capture the essence of Malmesbury. He spent the first day wandering through the town, capturing everything from the beautifully preserved ancient buildings to the seemingly mundane daily life of the townsfolk. As the sun began to set, he decided to head back to his friend Willow. She lived in a village nearby and was also a photographer, so she let him stay at her place, which had everything a photographer needs. In his room, he decided to review the day's work. With a cup of hot tea by his side, he began to scroll through the photos. They were beautiful, each frame capturing a unique aspect of Malmesbury. However, as he scanned through the photographs, he noticed something odd in one of the frames. It was a photo of the abbey's graveyard, taken as the sun began to set. Among the gravestones, he could make out a dark figure. It was as if a person was standing among the tombstones, their figure blurred and indistinct. Thinking it was a trick of the light, he continued scrolling through the images, but he noticed the figure again in another photograph, this time by an old market cross. The same shadowy figure stood in the background, just out of focus. A chill ran down his spine, but he shrugged it off, attributing it to long hours and fatigue. He decided to call it a night, but the strange shadow figure lingered in his mind. The following day, Martin continued with his photography. The town was buzzing with activity. It was market day, and the town square was filled with stalls. He managed to capture some beautiful images of the town's bustling life. However, as he reviewed his photos later that day, he noticed the shadow figure again. It was in different photographs at various locations, but always there. A cold sense of dread washed over Martin. He couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. Even when he was sure no one was in the frame when he took the shot, the figure would be there in the developed photograph, standing in the background. The figure was always hazy, almost smoky, as if made of shadows itself. It was shaped like a tall, slender man, but had no distinguishable features. It was just a dark, human-shaped smudge in his otherwise perfect photographs. Martin finally decided to confide in his dear friend, Willow. Willow was as perplexed as he was. She suggested that it could be a technical glitch or some problem with his camera or a part of it. Martin was inclined to agree, despite the chill that ran down his spine every time he saw the figure. He decided to have his camera checked at a local shop. When he got his camera back, the technician assured him that there was nothing wrong with it. With a sense of foreboding, Martin resumed his work, trying to ignore the looming figure that was slowly invading his life through his photographs. But the figure was not just a mere smudge in his photos anymore. It was starting to manifest in his life in terrifying ways. As Martin became increasingly aware of the figure, he began to feel its presence outside his photos too. At first, it was subtle, easy to dismiss as paranoia or an overactive imagination. He would see something from the corner of his eye, only for it to disappear when he turned to look directly at it. He began to notice odd occurrences around his living quarters. Objects would move from their original places. Doors would open or close without anyone around. Martin tried to reason it out, thinking perhaps he was just forgetting things due to stress. Yet the feeling of being watched was constantly there, a prickle on the back of his neck that refused to go away. It was as if the figure was gradually stepping out of the pictures and into his life. Feeling isolated and fearful, Martin reached out to Willow again, describing what he was experiencing. Worried for her friend, she suggested he speak to a local historian or even the town's elderly residents. They might know something about the figure, given the town's long history. Taking her advice, Martin approached an elderly resident, Mrs. Whitman, known for her expansive knowledge of the town's history. Over a cup of tea, he described his experiences, careful not to sound too panicked. After listening attentively, Mrs. Whitman grew silent, a frown settling on her face. She explained that, in the 18th century, a man known as the Watcher was a common figure in the town's folklore. The Watcher's existence had been a part of the town's folklore for centuries, passing down through the generations as an eerie legend. While Martin was skeptical about the paranormal, he couldn't ignore the eerie similarities between his experiences and the folklore. Although he wasn't fully convinced, the historical connection provided him a semblance of explanation, and for a while, he felt a bit reassured. He decided to go about his work, choosing to ignore the shadow figure as best he could. However, things took a more terrifying turn. One evening, Martin was walking back to his car after a late-night shoot. The moon was high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows on the cobblestone streets. As he turned into a narrow alley, he suddenly felt a chill. Martin stopped in his tracks, feeling as if he was not alone. He could sense a presence behind him. Turning around slowly, he saw the shadowy figure standing at the other end of the alley. It wasn't a trick of light or a figment of his imagination. The figure was there, more solid than it had ever been in his photos. Panic surged through Martin as he turned around and ran towards the crowded streets. He didn't look back until he was safely inside his car, his heart pounding loudly in his chest. That night he barely slept, constantly haunted by the figure. Over the next few days he saw the figure more often, no longer just in his photos but in the shadows of the town. It was always lurking, watching him from a distance. Fear began to consume Martin. He could no longer focus on his work. His project was due, but all he could think of was the figure and its unnerving presence. His life was spiraling out of control, dominated by an entity he could neither explain nor understand. In his desperation, Martin decided to take a drastic step. He planned to confront the figure directly, to demand answers, or at the very least, to understand what was happening. He had no idea how the confrontation would go, but he was determined to reclaim control over his life. His logic told him it was foolhardy, but he was driven by a sense of desperation. He had to put an end to this torment. He decided that the Abbey's graveyard, where he had first captured the figure in his photographs, would be the place for his confrontation. One cloudy day, armed with his camera, he walked towards the graveyard. His heart pounded against his ribcage, but he was resolute. Under the thick gray clouds, the graveyard seemed like a place from another world. It was silent, except for the distant rustling of leaves. The gravestones stood like silent spectators, shrouded in an unsettling serenity. Martin positioned himself in front of the gravestones where he first spotted the figure in his photo. He took out his camera and took a picture. On the tiny screen, he saw the figure standing far in the distance between two gravestones. Summoning his courage, Martin called out, his voice echoing through the silence. He demanded to know why he was being haunted, why he was chosen. To his surprise, the figure seemed to respond. It moved closer, still maintaining its distance but now visible to the naked eye. The figure stood there silently, its shadowy form undulating gently as if made of smoke. Then, in the deathly silence, Martin heard a whisper like the rustle of the wind. The spirit introduced itself as Elijah, a man who lived in the town more than 200 years ago. In a voice that seemed to echo from an abyss, Elijah confessed a chilling truth that shook Martin to his core. The details of what the spirit revealed were never disclosed, but it was evident that the knowledge was something terrifying, something that shattered Martin's view of reality. Haunted by this revelation, Martin immediately sought out Willow. His eyes bore a vacant, haunted look, and he seemed aged beyond his years. He recounted his encounter with Elijah, leaving out the specific details of the spectral revelation, but emphasizing the dire implications it held. "We do not deserve to live." Those were the last words Willow had heard from Martin before he left her place. Willow, alarmed by Martin's shaken demeanor, urged him to seek professional help. Martin, however, seemed to have sunk deep into a pit of despair from which he was unable to escape. He was tormented by nightmares, his once vibrant personality dulled by the crushing weight of the unknown. One evening, just a few weeks later, Willow received a call from Martin's neighbor, stating that they had found him lifeless in his home. He had taken his own life, unable to bear the torment of the horrifying secret he carried. The news sent shock waves through the town. Martin, a beloved member of the community, was mourned by all. Willow, grief-stricken, was left with the haunting memory of Martin's last days and the chilling mystery of what Elijah had revealed. Martin's camera and his final photos were found in his study. A chilling photograph of the spectral figure, more foreboding than ever, stood as a chilling testament to Martin's final encounter. Yet the nature of the revelation that drove him to such a drastic end remained a mystery. Even now, years later, the question lingers. What did Elijah reveal to Martin? What horrifying truth could have led a man as strong and resilient as him to such despair? The answer is locked away with Martin, a chilling mystery that leaves a sense of unease, an unfinished tale, a secret that died with him.